5 hearing aids landed on my bench with the same complaint. They just stopped working. Different brands, different shapes, different owners. One rechargeable behind-the-ear model, 2 tiny receiver and channel units, an older battery-powered aid, and a custom in-ear shell. From the outside, there is no obvious damage. Inside, the clues start repeating. These devices cost hundreds, sometimes thousands, and failure can cut someone off overnight. So what is killing them early? Bad engineering, bad maintenance, or something nobody talks about. A hearing aid is not just a louder button for the ear. Inside a shell smaller than a fingertip, it has microphones listening to the room, a processor deciding what matters, an amplifier shaping the sound, a speaker pushing it into the ear canal, a battery system feeding everything, and often a wireless radio talking to a phone or another hearing aid. That means every device on this bench is a tiny computer working in one of the worst places you could put electronics. It sits against warm skin all day. It gets hit with sweat, humidity, sunscreen, hair products, dust, and skin oils. The part closest to the ear deals with wax, moisture, and debris. Then it goes from a cold nightstand to body temperature, back into a charger or battery drawer, and sometimes onto the floor. Nothing about that environment is gentle. When these devices fail, it usually is not one dramatic event. A microphone gets slightly blocked, a charging contact starts to corrode, a receiver filter clogs, a seal stops sealing, a battery connection becomes unreliable. Each problem is small enough to ignore until the sound cuts out, the aid will not charge, or the owner thinks it is completely dead. That is what makes early failure so frustrating. The outside can look clean, intact, and well cared for, while the real damage is hidden under the shell. So before opening the first one, I want to start where every owner starts, the outside. On the first hearing aid, the outer shell does not look abused. The case is scratched from normal handling. The microphone openings are a little dusty and the charging contacts have lost some shine, but there is no obvious sign that this was dropped in water. I start at the contacts because power problems often show up there first. Under magnification, the metal is not bright anymore. One pad has a dull gray film across it, and along the edge, there is a faint green tint. That green color matters because it usually means copper or a copper alloy has reacted with moisture and contaminants. Next are the microphone ports. From the outside, they look like tiny black holes. Once the cover is off, there is residue around the port area. Not enough to block it completely, but enough to show that material has been sitting there. A microphone does not need to be buried to fail. A thin layer of debris can change how sound reaches the sensor. Now the shell comes apart, and the board inside gives the first real clue. Near the battery connection, there are sticky deposits around the solder joints. A few metal surfaces look dull instead of smooth and reflective. None of this looks like a dramatic flood. It looks like repeated small exposures that dried in place. The second device tells the same story in a different spot. Its charging contacts are darker, and one contact has a ring of residue around the base. Inside, there is discoloration near the lower edge of the board, exactly where liquid would settle if condensation formed and crept along the case. This is why hearing aids are so vulnerable. They sit against warm skin and close to the ear canal, where humid air has nowhere easy to escape. Even if the device is never visibly soaked, moisture can condense, dry, and come back again. So the first clue is moisture. But moisture alone is not the whole answer. The next devices show what it mixes with. The third hearing aid looks different before I even open the shell. The receiver outlet, the tiny opening where sound leaves the device and enters the ear, has a dark plug sitting right behind the wax guard. That wax guard is supposed to be sacrificial. It catches earwax before it reaches the speaker. The problem is that once the filter fills up, the hearing aid can still turn on, connect, and respond to buttons, but almost no sound gets through. To the user, that feels like the device is failing. Under magnification, the outlet is not just dirty on the surface. Wax has been pushed into the mesh, packed into the edges, and smeared around the plastic lip. This is mechanical blockage, not an electronic fault. The speaker may be producing sound normally, but the sound path is physically narrowed. That creates a common trap. The hearing aid sounds weak, so the user turns the volume up. Now the receiver is being asked to produce more output through a partially blocked opening. The result can be harsh sound, feedback, distortion, or faster battery drain, while the real problem stays hidden at the outlet. The microphone side has its own version of the same failure. The openings are tiny, and a little skin oil, dust, or pocket lint can change what reaches the microphones. If one microphone port is blocked more than the other, the device may lose directionality or make speech sound muffled, even though the electronics are still alive. On models with a tube or dome, the tube adds another failure point. A narrow tube can hold wax, moisture, and debris like a straw. Once it is partly blocked, cleaning the outside of the hearing aid does not restore the sound because the obstruction is sitting inside the pathway. This is why so many working hearing aids get mistaken for dead ones. The circuit can be fine, the battery can be fine, and the receiver can be fine, while clogged wax filters, blocked vents, and debris in microscopic openings choke the audio. The bigger problem is what happens next. Earwax does not arrive alone. It carries oils, salts, skin particles, and moisture. Once that mixture sits against metal and plastic, a simple blockage can become the start of a much more destructive failure chain. That mixture is where the real failure chain begins. Inside a hearing aid, the environment is warm, humid, and constantly exposed to skin contact. Warmth softens wax and residue. Humidity keeps it tacky. The wax then traps more moisture against the small openings, seams, battery contacts, and charging pads. At first, nothing dramatic happens. The device may still power on, it may still pair to a phone, it may even pass a basic function check. But on the metal surfaces, the contamination starts changing how electricity moves. A clean contact gives the circuit a predictable path. A dirty contact adds resistance, intermittent connection, or a thin conductive bridge where one should not exist. This is why charging complaints can be misleading. A hearing aid that refuses to charge may not have a bad battery. The charger may be fine too. If the charging pads are coated with oil, wax, or early corrosion, power transfer becomes unreliable. The device sits in the charger overnight, but the battery never receives a stable charge. The same applies to sudden shutdowns. A weak battery warning can be the symptom, not the cause. If voltage is dropping across dirty contacts, the electronics see unstable power and behave as if the battery is failing. Replacing the battery might help for a while, but the contamination is still sitting at the connection point. The microphones and receiver are even more vulnerable because they cannot be sealed away completely. They need open pathways to move air and sound. Those pathways also invite sweat vapor, dust, wax, and skin particles. Once debris reaches the mesh or port, performance drops before any chip on the board has actually failed. So the pattern is not one single broken part. It is contamination plus electronics plus time. Wax blocks sound. Moisture keeps residue active. Metal contacts corrode or conduct poorly. The user experiences weak audio, charging failure, battery warnings, or random behavior, even though the original cause may be a dirty pathway or contact. Now, there are two devices left on the bench. If this failure chain is real, the same clues should appear again, but in slightly different places. Device number 4 is a behind-the-ear model with a disposable battery door. The first weak point is obvious before the shell even opens. The door hinge has play, the gasket area is dirty, and the battery contacts have a dull, uneven surface instead of clean metal. That matters because this door is both a power connection and a moving seam. Inside, the board is not destroyed. There is no single burned component explaining everything. The damage is concentrated near the openings, around the battery compartment, near the microphone mesh, and along the edge where the housing halves meet. This design depends on tiny barriers staying clean, and once sweat and residue reach those barriers, the protection starts failing. Device number 5 is a different style again. It uses a receiver wire and a small speaker that sits closer to the ear canal. The main body looks cleaner, but the receiver end tells the story. The wax guard is loaded, the sound outlet is restricted, and the thin wire has stress right where it bends every day. That is the trade-off with this design. Moving the receiver into the canal can improve performance and comfort, but it puts one of the most delicate parts closer to wax, moisture, and repeated handling. A blocked wax guard can sound like a failed speaker. A strained receiver wire can act like an intermittent electronic fault. Across all 5 devices, the layouts changed, but the attack points stayed familiar. Contacts, doors, wires, guards, meshes, and seams. Brand, age, fit, and habits all matter, but the same ordinary environment kept finding the smallest path inside. So, if the cause is this predictable, what could have prevented it? Start with the parts that actually touch the world. Wipe the shell every day with a dry, soft cloth. Check the microphone openings, sound outlet, dome, wax guard, battery door, or charging contacts before they become packed with residue. Use the protection the device was designed for. Replace wax guards and domes on schedule. Keep filters clear and store the aids overnight in the correct case. For moisture-prone devices, a drying case or dehumidifier is not a luxury. It is part of maintenance. The fixes to avoid are just as important. Do not poke deep into ports, rinse the device, use harsh cleaners, or ignore repeated charging and sound dropouts. Early failure is usually hundreds of tiny exposures, not one dramatic accident. That is what the 5 teardowns showed. Early failure usually starts with contamination, moisture, and exposed contact points, not one dramatic defect. If your hearing aid keeps losing sound or refusing to charge, check the maintenance routine, then ask a hearing care professional. Thanks for watching. Comment with your failure story and tell me if you want a full cleaning and maintenance episode.